mid-morning on the 10th, the Marine Corps' birthday. We were on a rooftop, just still in the process of securing that facility. Dan was my fire support team leader, so he was my company representative in charge of anything that's not coming kind of directly from the infantry Marines, so artillery or aviation fires. So he's on the radio talking, coordinating with forward air controllers and artillery. The rooftop quickly became untenable just to the amount of fire came in. So we pulled down off the rooftop, and Dan was coming down the stairs when he was shot in the upper back. I heard the round hit his front SAPI plate because we were talking to each other when it occurred, and that was it. I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, but moved down to Georgia at about the age of 6 months, so I claim Marietta, Georgia as my hometown.
And had there been a history of military service in your family?
My father served in the Air Force during the Vietnam War.
Okay. Did that influence your decision to join the service?
To a degree, just the service aspect of what he did and his stories.
Why did you choose the Marine Corps?
It's a good one. A lot of intangibles roped up into that one, but honestly, I believe the initial invasion, Saddam Hussein's initial, the Gulf War, to simply put it. I was a senior in high school, and that kind of fired up something in me about, wanting to get out there. I think me and a buddy actually tried to figure out how we could get out of high school early and join the Marine Corps with our parents, age 17 waiver, and that didn't work out well, probably for good. But that kind of started the look, and just always inspired by reading books about history books and U.S. history, and just the idea of potentially, being able to be part of something bigger than myself, and that kind of drew me, those intangibles. And of the services, the Marine Corps does it better than anybody else and can tap into that, rightfully so. So that's kind of the path I took.
And did you attend college
I did.
the intent of pursuing ROTC?
No. So I attended West Georgia College. Now it's University of West Georgia. At the time was a small state school. Met my wife there, so it was a good pick. But freshman year, like a lot of freshmen, just kind of doing the freshman college thing, trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. The idea of service, whether it was law enforcement or military, was there. But I was, I say C+ kids rule the world. I was that C+ kid trying to get through my freshman year of college. And then I met a Marine officer recruiter on campus who are masters at touching that intangible piece I just talked about. And the ball got rolling, and I participated in what was called a platoon leaders course program, where I went to officer candidate school the summer between my sophomore and junior year, and my junior and senior year. That's sort of like a job interview for officer candidates if you can make it through. And then I said, this is what I want to do, and was commissioned as a second lieutenant upon graduation in the summer of '95.
And where did you go from there?
So I graduated college in the summer, waited a few months, and then attended the basic school in Quantico, Virginia, which is a 6-month program where all Marine officers attend. It's a baselining. We say every Marine is a rifleman. We also dictate that every Marine officer is a rifle platoon commander if need be, which has proven to be quite beneficial in past conflicts. So that school is a baselining for all officers, regardless of what you're going to do going forward. About 3/4 of the way through that school, you get your military occupational specialty. It's part what you desire, part what you're capable of doing, and part what the Marine Corps needs you to do. And I wanted to be, and was chosen to be, an infantry officer. So graduated the basic school and immediately attended the infantry officer course, which is another 3-month school focused on infantry-specific officer requirements to lead Marines. Graduated from the infantry officer course, and then proceeded to go to my first infantry battalion and assume the leadership role of my first infantry platoon.
And where was that?
That was at 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
What other assignments did you have prior to 9/11?
So, as just discussed, I was at 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines from 1996 to 1999. Pretty standard 1990s era East Coast Infantry Battalion, did a Marine Expeditionary Unit deployment, and ended up spending some time in Africa and Zaire and the Congo, and conducted a non-combatant evacuation operation out of Freetown, Sierra Leone. Got orders to the School of Infantry, which happens to be at Camp Lejeune as well, adjacent to Camp Lejeune, but geographically the same area, and spent the next 3 years at the School of Infantry as a company commander, a battalion operations officer, and then the director of a school. And in that time is when 9/11 occurred, obviously.
How did that day unfold for you? How did you hear about it?
I was in the office. I was the director of, at the time, Advanced Infantry Training Company. It's since changed names and grown in scope and complexity, but that was my job at the time, and we saw it on the news, like everybody else in the world, in our nation, not sure what was going on. But at the time, I had some of my subordinate units in the field training, and all I could think to do was just go out, and myself and my first sergeant drove out there, because they didn't have access to communications, or cell phones weren't a thing, just to explain to them what was going on and giving them the information that we had that we knew to be true at the time, which really wasn't much. So obviously a very somber day for everybody, but like everybody, kind of in the dark, even more so because most of us were out in the field training without access to the local news.
Did your orders change quickly after that, or did you finish that?
Mine did not. I was due to rotate in the summer of 2002 anyway. I had orders to the Expeditionary Warfare School, which is a school that's kind of a captain's career level school that a lot of captains go to in Quantico. So I already had orders to that, and there was no reason for me not to execute those orders. The service had the people the service needed to do what the service needed them to do, and they didn't need me doing something different at that point. So I attended that year-long school. While in school with all my peers is when Operation Iraqi Freedom 1 kicked off. So as an infantry captain, sitting in Quantico watching a lot of my friends participate in that was a interesting experience. We all would rather have been over there than sitting in a classroom, because we assumed that this would be over relatively quick, and you join the Marine Corps to do what the Marine Corps wants you to do, and there's a fight, and you want to go to the fight. So interesting year, great year educationally. Graduated in the summer of 2003, where there was a bit of a lull in Iraqi freedom at that point. Had orders to 1st Battalion, 8th Marines in the summer of 2003. I checked into Camp Lejeune, and everybody was gone because everybody was overseas in Iraq, starting to slowly phase back from, I guess at the time we called it OIF 1. I was an infantry captain now without a battalion to even check into because 1-8 was still overseas. And an opportunity came up to deploy to the country of Georgia as part of a small training team doing foreign internal defense type of things. So again, as a captain in the infantry sitting at Camp Lejeune while all my buddies were overseas, I raised my hand immediately to just get out of there. So I spent the last half of 2003 in the country of Georgia. And then after Christmas break, January of 2004, checked into Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines.
For those who serve, for those whose sacrifice will never end, the Gary Sinise Foundation shows its gratitude through entertainment, outreach, and life-changing support. To learn more, visit GarySiniseFoundation.org.
What was it like to meet those guys who had already had a little bit of a history together?
In 1-8?
Yeah.
It was interesting, but at the time, when you get back from a deployment, you immediately start to reset for the next thing. And Marines that were staying in the unit would be assuming their new positions, whether it was a leadership position or just another billet. Those that were executing orders would be preparing potentially to go to their next job. So it's always a bit of a transition period. So I came in during a transition period with a lot of other Marines and sailors coming into the battalion. So now you have this mix of old and new, which is how it always is, and there's goodness to that. And then you start building the new team for the new mission, which is what we did from January till June of '04.
And what specifically was the mission that you were preparing for at that point?
So at that time, it was a bit ambiguous. At least, again, I'm speaking from a young captain's perspective, right? Counterinsurgency, let's get the Iraqi leadership up on their feet and running, and all the stuff everybody knows. I don't need to, rehash what's out there a million times. But we weren't necessarily preparing for large combat operations. I mean, that's what Marines do. But the focus, if you had to pick a focus at the time, it was counterinsurgency, stability, security, those type of missions. There's something beneficial or any unit, but in a Marine Corps Infantry Battalion when you have a focus. Marines do better when you have a mission, a real mission. And we knew we were deploying to Iraq. We didn't know exactly what we would do when we got there, but that was enough to focus the Marines, myself included, on this. This is super serious. So yes, I think the Marines were as prepared as they could possibly be, knowing what we knew at the time. You had the big fight in Fallujah as well. So that was in our minds as well. So trying to balance the counterinsurgency, stability, security type of operations versus we had a couple battalions just going toe-to-toe. So we needed to make sure we're prepared to do that as well. So again, a good focusing mechanism for the Marines going into that environment.
So at what point in 2004 did you start to hear from your higher-ups that, you got to get ready for this, this is coming?
So interesting, the young Marines would routinely ask, because Marines are Marines, and if there's a fight over there, they want to go over to the fight. Like, hey, sir, are we going back in? And it's like, I obviously do not know the answer to that. Just focus on what we need to do today. But that's what you expect Marines to do. I would say maybe a few weeks out, I can't remember the timeline, maybe a few weeks prior, maybe late October, mid-October, you start to hear things that, hey, this something may be going on. Again, I'm not privy to senior leader discussions, but again, Marines, just be ready. That's all you got to do. You just be ready. We'll let the decision makers decide, and then we'll execute when the time comes.
From what I've heard from the other guys, it was just a couple days before the operation started that they really were under the impression that something was going to happen, mobilized, and then put in position.
Yeah, so we pushed from Al-Assad down the Anbar province towards Fallujah. And again, I apologize, I can't remember the exact timeline. I probably should have done, but all the histories are out there. You can see the dates. We pushed in to Camp Fallujah, just east of the city of Fallujah. And again, not entirely sure if we would actually go or not. There were some things at the higher level that were happening to include elections and all this stuff. But again, for the Marines, okay, this is now the environment we're in. So we're going to start focusing on combat operations in an urban environment. Whether we go or not is not relevant, but we're going to be prepared for that eventuality when it comes. So that's what the Marines were doing. As an 18 or 19-year-old, I can see how that is incredibly unnerving. Because despite, at our level, pushing as much information down as possible, by the time that information often gets down to the youngest Marine, it's modified itself because it's an iterative process. So you never have complete clarity, nor should we expect to have complete clarity, right?
Mm-hmm. So tell me about the shock and awe portion just before you guys went in, and then
I keep hearing this term shock and awe from the Marines. It's funny because I don't believe that was ever a term anybody used except the young Marines, which is fantastic. That's fine. I don't recall the term shock and awe. What you had was some initial preparatory things happening to set some conditions for the force to go in. But I imagine as a young Marine who's first deployment, when you see a lot of airplanes dropping bombs and artillery shooting, that is shock and awe, so I get it. So, from a human perspective, what that did for me, and I guess all the other Marines, is we knew this was going to be big, or at least for us, bigger than anything anybody of us had ever done. That solidified it. The first night we did everything at night, so the 8th into the 9th, I believe, is when the initial kickoff happened. And the division conducted some initial breaches and moved south into the city to do what they needed to do. It was a tremendous amount of fire. I mean, from U.S. coalition joint forces, joint fires going into designated targets to set conditions, and a lot of fire coming back out the other direction. So that was a mental click that, I mean, we already knew it was going to be big, but that mental click just kind of solidified that. And maybe that was good for some of the Marines, maybe it wasn't, but it certainly provided a focusing mechanism. The first night, Alpha Company was the regimental or the division reserve. We stayed back the first night for the initial breach, while the division breached through and gained an initial foothold, and were attacking through the city and just doing remarkable things. I'm able to listen in and hear what those warriors were doing, to include the Army units with us as we pushed south. And at a designated time, our higher headquarters was going to have my company essentially penetrate through the front, the deepest part of friendly lines, and seize the mayor's complex. And that was almost 24 hours later. So we spent that first day watching, listening, preparing mentally, tactically for the coming mission. But for that first day, those young Marines that you've been talking to were essentially spectators in this massive fight. And then on the night of the 9th, morning of the 10th, is when Alpha Company mounted up and conducted that movement to secure the mayor's complex.
And that was a successful operation, correct?
It was. The idea being that, shock, surprise, middle of the night, overwhelming firepower, get it, grab it, hold it. If anybody gets in your way, you're going to knock them down, which is exactly what occurred. We were able to get into the complex relatively, I'm not going to say easy, but about as planned, which is rare, because there was limited resistance from inside the complex, because I think we caught them by surprise. That lasted about an hour and a half, until the enemy recognized that there was a relatively large force smack dab in the middle of the city, while the rest of the division was kind of north of us fighting south. So we were pushed forward now into almost a city block outpost, and then the enemy, obviously, we have a plan, we have goals and objectives. Well, those are typically the exact opposite of the enemy's goals and objectives, right? So now that became a competition there in the center of the city.
Tell me what happened when the sun rose the next morning.
We were getting attacked from all sides, which was not unsurprising. We were in enemy territory, which they probably thought, going to bed that night, it would be theirs when they woke up, and it wasn't. So they wanted it back, and we were not going to give it to them.
And so describe the scene. How did you position your men, and what was the enemy presenting?
The mayor's complex at the time, I recently just looked on Google Earth. It looks a little different. I think there's some more structures potentially that have been built in the last 20 years. But at the time, it was a city block, about 300, 3 football fields by 3 football fields, if you can imagine that. But it wasn't as built up as a typical city block in that area, because there was, municipal type buildings. So my initial plan, which was iterated, with the lieutenants and staff NCOs, was to systematically, isolate it, gain a foothold, and then start grabbing buildings. Platoons would support other platoons, grab a building, support each other by either fire or observation. And the platoons, frankly, I pushed as much authority and responsibility down to the platoons as I possibly could, which is what Marines do. And they did the same to their squad leaders and team leaders, because this was a highly decentralized fight, and that's how you generate tempo. So we came in from the north. I didn't like the existing entrances to the compound. If I was a bad guy, you turn the map around, I would either booby trap those, put mines, or have something targeting that. So didn't want to use those entrances. So as we came in with our mechanized armored task force, Amtrak's LAV-25s and tanks. We conducted explosive and mechanical breaches at different locations through the compound walls to stream into this facility. The Marines spilled out and attacked their pre-designated objectives, grabbed buildings, secured them, supported each other, and we were just about through the entire complex within an hour and a half when the enemy woke up and started getting after us. So at that point it was, consolidate, hold, start leveraging joint fires to target the adversary where we could see them and communicate back to higher headquarters, because at this point the rest of the division is still in a massive fight in their own battalion, company, platoon, squad sectors, moving generally from north to south, from behind me coming towards us. All right, so helping coordinate with them to assist where necessary on enemy movements or what we're seeing. So that's kind of what was happening the first couple hours.
Now, a difficult moment in this fight is the loss of Lieutenant Malcolm. Explain what happened in that situation and what his loss meant to the platoon.
Yeah, so mid-morning on the 10th, the Marine Corps' birthday, we were on a rooftop, just still in the process of securing that facility, mostly there. Dan was my fire support team leader, so he was my company representative in charge of, I use the term joint fires, but anything that's not coming kind of directly from the infantry Marines, so artillery or aviation fires, kind of coordinating that in conjunction in support of the maneuver of the company. So it's a very important job. So he's on the radio talking, coordinating with forward air controllers and artillery, forward observers, and the rooftop quickly became untenable just to the amount of fire came in. So we pulled down off the rooftop. And I don't remember exactly how long after we pulled down, but I was down in a foyer type area, and Dan was coming down the stairs briefing me on the status of the aviation assets on station and all the things that we needed to know to support the Marines and get after the bad guys. When he was shot in the upper back, so I heard the round hit his front SAPI plate because we were talking to each other when it occurred, and that was it.
Describe him as a leader and as a Marine.
He's like all of them, he was a patriot. He's a great Marine officer, a great person. Just smart, willing to do whatever it took to take care of his Marines and get the job done. And he's fantastic.
Explain how you were able to push away from the mayor's complex. Who made that call and how was it executed?
So mid-afternoon, again, timeline gets a little blurry, mid-afternoon, maybe later towards the evening, the division has started to come on, I use the term online, it's not that simple, but online with the mayor's complex, which is not quite halfway down the south side of the city on a large east-west running highway, which we used as a phase line to help for command and control for different fires purposes. We were told that at some point in the near future, when conditions were set, which were going to be determined by those much senior to me at the time, that the division was going to then continue the attack south to clear and zone. Basically, we know most of the enemy are now south of us because we've killed the ones north of us, and we're gonna go down and finish the job. I got permission to push a platoon south across that phase line. With the goal being, in any time you're in a fight, you want your decision cycle to be faster than the adversaries. You want to stay in their decision-making loop. You want to keep them second-guessing and thinking and concerned about what your next move is. So we pushed a platoon south of the phase line, and at the time they were most likely the most southernmost coalition force in the fight. And that night they grabbed a piece of terrain, kind of hunkered down, and essentially were going to be some eyes and ears for the regiment as the sun came up before we did this push. When the sun came up, Lieutenant Ackerman's platoon was essentially surrounded by a large number of enemy fighters who were, I wasn't with him, I was talking to him, but it sounded like they were in a staging area preparing for a big assault back to the north. And he was either, based on who you are, at the right place or the wrong place at the right time. And we had a little talk, and he laid into him. And his Marines did some fantastically heroic things for a few hours. Once given the order, we were told to move out of the mayor's complex south into the rest of the southern portion of the city. Getting across that phase line was a challenge because south of the phase line was full of bad guys, and they weren't going to let us just bebop across the street. So we used heavy amounts of suppressive fires to cover the Marines' movement. And this is through coordinating with other companies and adjacent units and bringing in different capabilities, which is what we trained to do, and it worked out pretty well, and pushed into the south side of the city and started our clearing operations south. You're in the fight now, and you just hope that you trained hard enough. And I think these Marines were prepared.
From the other guys that I've interviewed, in talking about your leadership as company commander, your calmness, even in the most chaotic of situations, is that training? Is it your natural demeanor? Is it meant to convey confidence to them? How do you...
I would say it's probably just, a bit of who I am. I certainly, you want to do well, right? I'm a company commander in combat, so I want to get the job done. I spent 9 years preparing for this moment, maybe not particularly this, but the Marine Corps trusted me with the privilege and the honor to command an infantry company, which frankly, it's about as good as it gets. It's the best job in the world. It is, because at that level, you can still get to know your young Marines. Much higher than that, it's just because of scope, scale, and complexity, you don't. Just pragmatically, obviously, being highly excited on the radio does not instill confidence. So I know that, right? So even if I was highly excited on the inside, and there were times where I was highly excited on the inside, that's not helpful to a Marine who's in a really bad spot. That's leaders just, commanders kind of know that. It's just part of the way it is. Yelling, frankly, the only spot for yelling is when it's a volume issue. And in a fight like that, sometimes you're yelling just to talk over the sound of machine gun fire. But I was just humbled, to this day, humbled to have the opportunity to be with them.
One of the toughest days of the battle was the loss of Bradley Faircloth around Thanksgiving of 2004. What do you remember about that day?
Yeah, so prior to Bradley, we lost Travis Desiato as well. Both terrible days. It's not something you try to prepare for it. The Marines try to prepare for it. Especially at this point in the fight, the carnage and the violence made it apparent that plenty of Marines have been wounded at this point. Mostly small arms fire and close range. Some of them were already back in the fight. Some of them were on their way home to get the good care that they deserved. It takes a piece out of you. But our team leader, his squad leader, his platoon commander, me, we've got 180 other Marines that are still in the fight. And they need their team leader and their squad leader and their platoon commander, company commander, battalion commander to get them through the fight. So it's a tension. It is. But yeah, you leave a piece of yourself. At least I did in that city.
Last question. What are you most proud of from your distinguished 29 years in the Corps?
Most proud that I had the honor and the privilege to, I was in a leadership position, but frankly, to serve alongside these guys. And I think most officers would say something similar to that. I mean, it's absolutely an honor and privilege. Like, I'm the probably luckiest guy in the world.